Excellencies, Honourable Ministers of Tourism, distinguished ladies and gentlemen of the global investment, hotel and development community, to colleagues from Bench Events and from Questex, again, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. It is my immense honour and pleasure to be with you all today and to be back on this stage for what is without a doubt the hottest ticket in Berlin right now. I think we've all seen from the security that this is the room everyone wants to be in. After last night's lovely reception, hosted by Residor, it's a little bit more difficult to get into at this time of the day because people are just tired. But it really is a very special occasion because this is the environment in which the business is happening. And you can feel it in the hotel right now that the ground is shaking because the deals are taking place. This is one of the real blessings of having this event. And what is also taking place is the opportunity for us to look at this industry from different angles. So this morning, we're going to be speaking to two of the finest leaders that we do indeed have when it comes to the global travel and tourism community, which is the feeder supply for ultimately all of the hotel investments and developments that take place around the world. I feel very privileged and I feel very fortunate because as a moderator, these two gentlemen make up what I call moderating candy. They are absolutely divine people, they are incredibly good souls, and they're probably very familiar faces to many of you in the room. It is my honor and pleasure to firstly introduce Dr. Taleb Rifai. He is the Secretary General of the UNWTO, a Jordanian by birth, a man of great heart, exceptional leadership, and we in the tourism community are very blessed to have him at the helm. Dr. Rifai, please. It is also my pleasure to now introduce a gentleman who is referred to as Dr. Rifai's half-brother. Unfortunately, Dr. Rifai and our next guest have never really defined which halves they represent, but we know that they are half-brothers when it comes to travel and tourism. It is Mr. David Scousel. He is the President and CEO of the World Travel and Tourism Council, I beg your pardon, and he is ultimately the business side for what Dr. Rifai represents the government side when it comes to travel and tourism. David, please join us on stage. Fantastic. So this morning, we're going to basically have a conversation with, as I said, two really fantastic leaders when it comes to global travel and tourism, and a critical, for lack of better words, supply chain when it comes to hotel investments and developments. What we wanted to do is really just plant some seeds around what exactly is happening when it comes to global travel and tourism. What can we look forward to, and therefore where can investor confidence be planted to shape both the investment community and the tourism community? Based on that, I'd ask David, please, to help set the scene by calling out 4 or 5 statistics that we in the investment community need to understand when it comes to global travel and tourism opportunity. Please.
Well, good morning, Anita. If I can use one of Taleb's numbers first, we talk about 1 billion people having crossed international boundaries last year. 1 billion, 8 billion? Yes, 87. And that's a number that's going to grow to 1.8 billion by 2030, so that's one key piece of information. We as an industry account for 9% of GDP, which is some $6.6 trillion, to put that in the perspective of some of Andrew's comments. And we employ 266 million people around the world, which is 1 in 11 jobs on the planet. And over the next 10 years, that 266 million will go up by about another 70 million, and 2/3 of that will be in Asia Pacific.
Brilliant. Dr. Rifai, anything to add on top of that, please?
Not much more than to say that probably, having heard the last presentation, one very important good piece of news that is coming out of many, many economies, particularly the advanced economies, has been the travel and tourism industry against all odds. So that tells you something about the significance, the importance, the vitality, and the ability of this industry to adjust and be flexible and agile.
Absolutely. One of the reasons why it was very important to get Dr. Rifai and David here to this particular stage was to get a sense of how can we ensure that the travel and tourism industry is working much more closely with the hotel investment community. Which begs the question then to both of you who, and these two gentlemen have battery packs in their shoes because between the International Hotel Investment Forum and ITB, Berlin is going to be a very demanding week. Why are you here? Why is being here important for your agenda from a travel and tourism perspective? Dr. Rifai.
Being here is a must. This is where you measure the pulse, where you contribute to whatever is happening in the industry. And this is where the industry renews its confidence with each other. You know, we look each other in the eye and we say, we're going in the right direction, are we? And we exchange news, we exchange views, we exchange information, and we do business. And as far as I'm concerned, as you correctly say, you know, tens of meetings and engagements, and it's a wonderful opportunity to be.
So why put the International Hotel Investment Forum on the top of your agenda?
Because the hotels and the hospitality industry is the backbone of this industry, without doubt. That's for sure. And secondly, because we do have a challenge with finance and investment nowadays when it comes to tourism. I believe that there are many challenges that we can probably have the opportunity to discuss in the course of this session over here. We're still lagging behind in the acknowledgement, the understanding, and the appreciation of what this sector is all about when it comes to finance and investment. It's a challenging nut to crack. It is still very much of a small and medium-sized industry, and it's fine to continue this way, but I believe that this is an important forum because it's a forum where we could understand each other and listen to what we have to say to each other. We need to understand, we as the people that are working in the travel and tourism industry in terms of promotion and in terms of awareness raising and mainstreaming, we need to understand more clearly the concerns of the investment community, and the investment community needs to hear from us.
Absolutely. And David?
Yes, we should talk a little bit about the open letter meetings we have with these heads of state in a second, because we know our industry is far bigger by most measurements than banking, communications, agriculture in different parts of the world. And we've got some great research that shows all of that between us. But there is a disconnect with the investment community at the moment, because in the private sector organisation, the hotel operating business is a part of what we do. So they give us all the messages we need to take to these heads of state. But what we're not getting clearly from this audience is the messaging about why they're not investing in certain parts of the world. Is it through lack of tax incentives or corruption, or a whole series of reasons why they might not choose to invest in a particular country? And so when Taleb particularly goes and sits and meets with these heads of state to talk about 4 or 5 key things in their country that's important for our industry, sometimes there's a gap, because sometimes we don't have that information from the investment community about why they're not making investments in certain countries.
Just to make something clear, since February of 2011, David and I have met with 57 heads of states and heads of governments to try and make them a bit more sensitive to our sector and more appreciative of it. So that's the size of the advocacy work that we're embarked in.
And what's lovely about your partnership in that regard is that it's going past the usual metrics of travel and tourism, of arrivals, of the people traveling, to the investment attraction, to the generation of jobs that takes place in markets. How can we therefore ensure that the travel and tourism community is able to work more effectively with the hotel investment community to ultimately meet what is a shared agenda? What shifts need to take place from our side in travel and tourism to make the hotel investment community work much more effectively and yield the returns that we all want?
Well, if I can start, I mean, we've got to find a better communications channel into the investment community, because there are lots and lots of private businesses involved in this kind of activity. And somehow we've got to get closer to all of that and find a mechanism for surfacing those key issues that are stopping investment in certain parts of the world, or indeed increasing investment, putting it on fast forward in places where the investment climate is right. So I think it's all about that information flow. Because when Taleb and I sit with these heads of state, we are merely the voice piece for the industry. And depending on the particular head of state in a particular country, we might be talking about air service agreements, or foreign direct investment for hotels, or visas, or taxation issues, whatever the live issues are there. So that the more we can be closer to this community to understand those investment messages, then the more help we will be in helping them to make their investments.
Please, Dr. Rifai.
I think we need to get a clear message through. This is the industry for the future, without doubt. When we say 1 billion people crossing borders internationally as tourists in 1 year, that was in 2012, and it's 1,087,000,000, that's the initial count for 2013. We're talking about 1 out of 7 of the people of the world making an international trip every year. In addition to we estimate 5.5 billion domestic trips done every year. We're looking at an industry that is moving the world. People have defied borders, people have got over so many obstacles that are still in the face of travel, and this industry is only there to grow. So we need to understand that this is investing in the future. Now, that's something that we are trying to disseminate as a message to everybody. But on the other hand, we also need to come to terms with the investment community, particularly in the hotel industry, to say, okay, where do we go and how do we do it? Because I tell you, there is open appetite now for investment in tourism in many, many parts of the world, particularly the developing countries. But the landscape is changing, the sensitivity of the local communities and the developing nations is becoming more acute. They understand exactly what an investment in a hospitality industry would do to the local community, to the overall economy, but they have their own requirements as well. And we need to come to terms with that. It is not just a matter of coming, investing, and leaving. I mean, the travel and tourism industry, the hospitality industry, requires a certain social sensitivity to its investment that probably no other industry does have. It's a people's industry. Once a hotel or a hospitality investment comes into a community, it changed their lives forever. Absolutely. It changed the way they think, it changed the way they operate, it changed the way they look, it changed the way they relate to, and we need to be sensitive to all of these issues.
David, on that.
Yeah, just this last point on data and information flow. We've done lots of good work on visas recently, and I'm only making this point to talk about the numbers behind it. Because with the US had lost about $600 billion since 9/11 because they weren't getting their fair share of tourists. So you had a Commerce Department who were trying to get people into the country and a State Department trying to keep them out. Now, the only person that could resolve that ultimately was President Obama, hence the need for us to go in at that kind of level. But once he got involved, things started to change. But the point of the story is, with the investment community here, when we're going into these meetings, I make a few frantic phone calls to people like Arthur de Haast at Jones Lang LaSalle and others to say, Taleb is going to be in Kenya, or he's going to be here. What are the messages for that president or prime minister that you, the investment community, want to get across? Is it tax? Is it corruption? Is it whatever it happens to be? Give us those messages. Now, we don't have that feed to us both ways set up properly at the moment, and that's really one of the key messages for us this morning, I think.
And I think that in many ways is you've unlocked the critical opportunity of this kind of a dialogue, because to your point, you have access to those heads of state. You have access through your networks to those heads of industry to have a conversation proactively about what the investment community needs to get a message across in regards, or to have unlocked within a market to enable that. Because to your point, there is appetite, but there's a range from anorexia to obesity risk when it comes to development. So you have the data to back up both the supply and the demand opportunities and where the risks are for investors. To that point, investment takes place. The risk often takes place in terms of, as we say, excess, undersupply, or there's no momentum of utilization of the assets because there isn't momentum of tourism. When we talk about sustainability, which has become a very dangerous generic word because everything gets squeezed into it, how do we define sustainability when it comes to tourism that connects us back to the investment community?
Let's first establish a principle. We should embrace growth, we should embrace progress and investment without reservations and without limits, I may dare say. Any assumption that growth, investment, progress is the antithesis of sustainability and responsibility is a dead hypothesis from the beginning. Growth is not, and sustainability, responsibility are not a zero-sum game. To the contrary, we have excellent examples of where, when we enter a place, we simply make it better for people, planet, and for profit, for all three. And that's a formula that we must always keep in mind. Risks, of course, there are risks. Tourism is a very, very sensitive industry. It bows its head whenever a milestone comes across, but it has this tremendous ability to bounce back, and we've seen this in many, many situations where there are man-made or natural-made crises, how the hospitality industry bounces back so quickly. So we need to understand how to position ourselves within the society and the community and move forward.
Absolutely. David?
I think the other reason it's critical that we have this close relationship with the investment community is around infrastructure build. And it's not just the hotels. Most people are here for hotel investment, but a number of people in the audience are involved in other big investments around infrastructure, rail, road, airport terminals, and all those kinds of things. And again, we have a lopsided issue in the sense that all of that growth and development is happening in Asia at the moment, and none of it's happening in Western Europe because it's much more difficult to get these things through planning processes. But again, when we go and sit down and have these conversations, it's important we have the total picture on infrastructure and that we understand what that government's trying to do in planning for the long term, planning the infrastructure build to stay ahead of the growth, but planning it in a sustainable way in terms of its design and its design and implementation.
Indeed, and that's an important point, that it's the holistic infrastructure, because as much as this is the hotel community link to an integrated chain between aviation, between destinations, unless all of those links function across them. And that's where the beauty of you both is that you are able to see that aerial view across the entire mix. So regardless of how many incentives there are for hotel developments, if the aviation component is not in place, people simply can't get to the destination. And I think that's where the value of yourselves as ambassadors and messengers of the travel and tourism community is you can enable the unlocking of those potential blockages to open up the opportunities. Where do you each see the opportunities really unlocking going forward in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, the expected growth by itself is a very solid foundation. We're talking about a growth of 3.3 to 3.5% every year on year between now and 2030. How are we going to accommodate that growth? Where is it going to come? And this is not a growth that is in doubt. It's not stoppable. You may have an issue in one part of the world, in one country, in one destination, but the overall global scene is definitely moving forward. Secondly, the travel industry is coming into the realm of becoming not only a human need, but rather a human right. So we are going to continue to see more people crossing borders, more people leaving their house, and more people wanting to experience the travel experience, so to speak. So I believe that in speaking to an investment community, the most attractive proposition is, look, there is growth, and somebody has to pick it up. I would start by that and then saying, okay, but how and where?
Indeed. It's ultimately where's the compass pointing that's going to make sense within the greater mix. David?
Yes, and I think when you're talking to owners and private investors particularly, all the data exists. Andrew's data, our data, the forecasts out for 10 years, and it shows that this industry grows ahead of the global economy all of the time, yes. About 1 percentage point ahead of the global economy. So that's a great message for investors. Then secondly, when investors are looking at, do I invest in the travel industry as opposed to something else? Again, all the data's there about how big we are as an industry and how many people we employ and all of those good things. But to your question about where that growth is coming, and we shouldn't spend too long on China, but the thing about China is that they've made travel and tourism one of the key pillars of their GDP generation, their growth, and that they've planned ahead of the curve of these people coming to the middle classes. So they are constructing 69 new airports so that no single person in China will be more than 90 minutes drive from the nearest airport. Now that kind of fundamental planning for the future is extraordinary, and it's not something we see in the so-called developed world in Europe and the US, where we struggle to take simple decisions around one more airport terminal building or one more runway in a particular location.
But it's an important, as to your point, it's an ideal scenario, but it's also a very valuable indicator of travel being a facilitator of growth, not the end goal, which is a really important message to all. I want to speak very briefly, because we have a few minutes left, on the issue of human capital development, because we speak a lot about the physical capital within the hotel investment community. Human capital development, what message would you want to get out to this community around the need to develop the people within these beautiful properties?
I think the human capital challenge is going to be one of the most important challenges for the future. Travel and tourism is an industry that is so attractive to young people, first entry to the labor market. It prepares them for so many other venues of life after they do that. But we're losing so many of the talented people that we invest in, because less than 20% of the people that are trained to work in travel and tourism end up actually continuing their path, and that's a very important indicator.
Why do we lose them?
Because the quality of work, the quality of a job in the travel and tourism industry is still not seen in a highlight, and it still needs a lot of work to be able to become a sustainable
career
job,
progress.
Career progress. And with this growth coming into place, we really need to invest more in the human capital. The other part of the story is also that local communities are very, very sensitive when it comes to investment to the issue of jobs. They're sensitive to two very important things, and I say this out of first-hand experience from a developing country that I come from. Jobs, what is it doing to us? And not just any job. I've seen situations where you say, we're providing you with jobs, but it's not the jobs that only matter to the local communities. It's okay, what do we get out of this? What is our future being? It's not just a matter of going there, spending a few hours, coming back and getting paid. There is much more than that to it. And leakages. Leakages when it comes to jobs and when it comes to capital as well.
Absolutely.
So I think the issue of human capital is one of the most serious challenges that we need to look at when we talk with the investment community.
Indeed. David, last word.
Well, I'm sure this will be mirrored in the next panel discussion with the chief executives, because when I talk to them, human capital development is right up the top of their agenda, particularly if they're expanding rapidly in Asia Pacific. And I don't think we as an industry have done well enough to communicate how good our industry is, not just to join when you're young at the bottom end, but to move up and to stay with the industry. It's too tempting for kids in their mid-20s to leap out of our industry into investment banking or other areas which pay more in the short term. So we've got a bigger job to do, I think.
Brilliant. Excellent. My time is starting to flash, and as we all know, time equally in this community is money. These two gentlemen, you have their contact details in the International Hotel Investment Forum contact list. Please keep their contact details at the top of your resource lists when it comes to understanding the critical information you need to know around the tourism sector to make sure that your beautiful properties are indeed filled and your investments yield the return that you want. But for the meantime, I ask you all to please join me in thanking them very much for their time. Wish them very strong soles and feet over the next week at ITB, and God bless and thank you very much. Thank you all.